All right. Hello and welcome. In theory, we should be live on LinkedIn. My name's Dave Haynes. I'm from FOV Ventures. FOV Ventures is an early stage fund investing in founders building the metaverse. And I'm really thrilled to be here with some guests. I'm going to go quickly round and just get everybody to introduce themselves, and then I'll set the scene for the rest of the conversation. So Denise, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Denise. I'm partner at Mercuri. We're a London-based early-stage VC fund. We lead seed rounds, which in the UK typically are between £1.5 and £4 million. And we specialize at the intersection of media and technology. And so that's everything to do with new technologies for content creation, distribution, consumption, or indeed new types of business models. And of course, that very naturally overlaps with all of generative AI, but also all of mixed reality, AR, VR, gaming, as well as sort of the more traditional kind of media tech spaces and ed tech and future work and so on. So yeah, very excited to be here and to have this discussion with you all.
Awesome. Thanks, Denise. And Arian?
Yeah. So I run a fund, Earthling.vc. We invest pre-seed in what we call kind of the next paradigm of digital technology, which makes basically computing feel more human. So, dynamic, serendipitous, spatial, all of that. Going to keep it short. I mean, kind of within that, there are two elements. There's obviously the digital side and the kind of more real world side, if you will. So typically we look at like AR, VR, AI, and like robotics kind of on that side. And also have kind of naturally a lot of gaming focus from the digital side now. But yeah, very pre-seed, future of digital technology.
Awesome. Amal?
I'm Amal. I'm a partner with Anorak Ventures with Greg Castle. Anorak is an emerging tech fund, so we invest in a wide variety of technologies, but we have a particular focus on AR and VR because we were seed investors in Oculus and have continued to invest in that ecosystem. So we are in a number of prominent VR companies like Rec Room, Prisms VR, Oso VR, and others, and we very actively invest in VR.
Awesome. And lastly, Tipatat.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tipatat Chennavasin, general partner, co-founder of the Venture Reality Fund. We've been investing in VR, AR, AI, and metaverse since 2016. We've done Rec Room with Anorak, but we also did Beat Saber, Job Simulator. But then we've done a lot in healthcare and training, computer vision, and generative AI before it was called generative AI. And really excited to be here with you guys.
Yeah, awesome. Good stuff. So just to kind of a look ahead and what we're trying to do with this panel. So we actually did something very similar to this the week after the Apple Vision Pro announcement, and it was a really good chat. We went fairly deep on, the product, but also where the opportunities were for investors and for startups. And we wanted to do something very similar now that we've just got past MetaConnect. So I think a few of us were looking forward to MetaConnect. I think actually a few of us may have even been there. Tipatat, you were at the event this year?
Yep, I was there.
Yeah.
It was a much smaller event than usual because they actually had it on Meta campus. And so I think that was kind of a shame. I know there are a lot of great developers and other investors that wanted to go, but they just weren't giving out as many invites as they had in previous years.
Yeah, exactly. So it'd be great to get your thoughts, but also just from an investor perspective, what did we make of the announcements? There was new hardware. There was the Quest 3 that I think we knew about. There was also the new Ray-Bans, but then a lot of things around mixed reality, AI, some stuff that they're doing in generative AI with Emu. So there is a lot to unpack and dive into, but we're going to try and do that through an investor lens. Like, what are we excited about? How does that change the way that startups should be thinking about what they attack or maybe what they don't? There was definitely a few times in the keynote where I thought, there goes that startup, or there goes this startup. But then also a few times I was like, oh, wow, okay, this is, a really exciting game changer for people. So I'm going to be asking a few questions, and we'll just take this as a very kind of informal, casual conversation. We can see all of the comments coming in from LinkedIn. So if you're out there, feel free to introduce yourself, say who you are, who you work for. Hopefully you can network with each other in the chat. And also we won't have an official Q&A, although I may prompt some questions at the end. But if you guys, as we discuss, if you want to kind of make comments or ask questions in the chat, I can actually put those up on screen and we can kind of dive into them at the time. So So yeah, so let's kick off. Tipatat, I'm going to come to you first because you were actually there live. Very jealous. I'm hoping to make it next year. What was the vibe like? Yeah, just give us a very kind of high level sense of what it was like to be there and kind of the what the developer community and people attending thought.
I think overall the vibe was pretty positive. It wasn't over the top though. It wasn't like the vibe that you got like after the Apple Vision Pro launch, where like people were just, I think, going way more manic. I think there wasn't anything unsuspecting in terms of on the XR side. Like everyone knew the Quest 3, everyone knew what it was all about. Most developers there actually had hands on it already. So in that sense, everyone's excited. They just think, okay, Quest 3 is going to be awesome. I think a lot of XR folks were a little caught off guard by how much time was spent on AI and like AI in the non-XR sense. And so just, so much attention was given to, the AI, characters that are going to be in the messengers and in Instagram and all that kind of stuff. Right. And I think also too, like how much attention was given, because equal amounts of attention was given to the Quest 3 as there was to, the AI, generative AI avatars and chat, and then also the Ray-Ban, which again, Stories wasn't known to be a big success. And even though I liked mine, not a lot of people I know actually wore them or used them. And so it was interesting to see that, again, it was that combination of, smart glasses, maybe generative AI will be the killer app for the smart glasses. And that's kind of what they're pushing forward. But so it was definitely very AI heavy as opposed to just being like XR focused. And I think the one thing that did kind of also catch us off guard I felt like there wasn't as much focus on the actual developers and showcasing the developer success as there has in previous years. Like previous years, they would bring companies on stage or talk about the successes of certain companies and be like, like this company did this or why. And this was really more focused. Okay, this is Mark, and he's talking about the things that he's interested about and what's exciting in Quest 3 and then these other things. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing to see.
Dave, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Jordan from the chat asks, who do you feel Connect was for? Was it for developers, creators, or actually shareholders? I mean, I think that there's definitely been a few keynotes where the CEOs have come out and really felt pressure to talk about AI. It was interesting. I noticed a lot of people were watching Meta stock as Mark Zuckerberg was speaking. It went sharply down as Mark was speaking, but it climbed back up throughout the rest of the event, especially when they got into the AI bit. So yeah, maybe you can address Jordan's question.
I mean, at least I feel like the keynote was definitely for the shareholders, right? Like, I don't think it was like super developer focused, but the event itself, I think, was developer focused and, showcasing. And again, they're trying to really push this idea of mixed reality, which even the Quest Pro has been out for a while. It still hasn't been a major focus for a lot of the devs there. And so just kind of showcasing and highlighting some of that, I really got that feel. Like, honestly, I didn't attend any of the talks. I really just end up just talking and interfacing with a lot of the developers that are out there. I will say this, though. I did feel like there wasn't much attention, especially given to enterprise. It was definitely consumer focused, and especially, like not just in terms of talking to the, seeing the keynote, but also talking to the devs that were there, looking at like some of the programming and just hearing about like, kind of what the focus was. It was definitely hey, Quest 3, mixed reality. And I felt like that was the focus for the devs that were there. Right.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, Amal, you mentioned in your intro, I mean, Anorak and Greg were, original investors into Oculus. So, the form factors come on. It feels like the Quest 3 is kind of it is the state of the art for the form factor. I was actually, when they announced it previously, I have a Quest Pro and it was a bit like, oh, hang on, like this is actually potentially better than my Quest Pro, which leaves a question on why the Quest Pro is still available. But yeah, where do you think we've come with the state of the art? Are you kind of happy with where the Quest 3 is at? Any thoughts on the hardware?
I think the Quest 2 was the first, Oculus or Meta headset that was had really made it like fully able to go mainstream, but it had a lot of drawbacks, right? The comfort is a big issue, just like the weight, bulkiness, and comfort is a big issue, and I can't use it for more than like an hour without getting uncomfortable. And the optics, clearly, like a lot of people were using the Quest Pro for the optics, and now the Quest 3's optics are where it needs to be. So when we talk to our founders, they are really excited about the ability of Quest 3 to be something where and the majority of our investments are enterprise. And so you have to take this not to like a 10-year-old kid who's playing games, but you have to take this to a Fortune 500 VP and say, okay, put this thing on your face. Their level of patience for this is not very high. Already, they're doing you a big favor by putting this thing on their face in the first place. And so you want it to be a showstopper experience when they get into it. And I think the Quest 3 is there, right? I haven't had one personally yet, but all of our portfolio companies have the Quest 3, and they are really excited about how much better it is than the Quest 2. So I'm really excited about it there. I agree that, not much is really talked about. Meta doesn't talk much about how much success the Quest has had in enterprise. And I get it, because enterprise doesn't move millions of headsets, right? Meta is not trying to become like a hardware supplier for other people's business models. They're a consumer advertising company that wants to advertise to consumers on millions of headsets. But I think what enterprise shows is that if you create enough value, the people will come to it. And we have companies training surgeons in VR, and they love it, and they're doing it every day, and it's an indisputable success. So I'm very excited for kind of that next level of ramp up. But I also agree with Tipatat. Look at what Apple did with the Vision Pro announcement. They showed you VR FaceTime, right? Like, they showed you that. Meta has had this research into codec avatars that is supposedly insanely great, but only available to Mark Zuckerberg and Lex Fridman. They have all this technology in the Quest Pro that, like, they should have been able to build this themselves, but it's all just like bits and pieces. They're like, okay, well, the Quest Pro has these optics and has these face cameras, and the Quest 3 has that, and it doesn't have the face cameras. And now Lex Fridman's doing the codec avatars, but this isn't in the Quest 3 because it doesn't have the face cameras, but it might be in the Quest Pro 2, and it's like, there's no coherent story. So it's going to be, the burden will be on the startups to tell this story, because Meta's not telling that story for them.
And the VCs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's super interesting, because it feels like, I mean, there was definitely some kind of like subtle stabs at, or not so subtle stabs at Apple, like kind of saying, hey, look, we could build what you build, but actually our game is we want to make this like very accessible to people. And there was a joke, I can't remember if it was by Boz or someone else, but saying, hey, at least this one doesn't have a battery pack and cords and stuff like that. And I think for me to get this level of quality in a headset, for $500, like, it does feel like this is now potentially a mainstream device. But Denise, I want to come to you. You don't have as much VR in your portfolio as maybe some of we do. So what's your, as you look on, like, is it like, right, this is a kind of an iPhone moment? Yes, this is, the point at which we can invest in VR because there's now the headset and distribution, or are you more skeptical?
Probably still a little skeptical, to be very candid. From Quest 3, I don't think that there were any major announcements around potential new use cases, for example, outside of, gaming, entertainment, overwhelmingly. Although within these, of course, the Xbox partnership is very interesting, and certainly the higher quality could be very interesting. I mean, the main kind of, I guess, bottleneck for us historically for investing have been propensity to pay for consumer-facing businesses, right? And ultimately market size. So how many of those headset owners are going to convert to a user of a particular application? And I think it's still very hard to, to prove traction or ability to gain traction across both of those areas. So I think ultimately it comes down to, is B2C just generally harder for startups? Is enterprise really kind of still where the bigger opportunity lies? And then how is, this new hardware potentially more relevant for enterprise?
Yeah, cool. And then let's stick with hardware for one more question. Yeah, Arian, maybe you can kick us off just with another big feature of the Quest 3, which was obviously a big feature of the Vision Pro, was just this kind of move into mixed reality. So that's having, full color pass through. So I'm in a VR headset. So I can see the world around me, but I'm overlaying kind of, virtual objects and assets in front of me. Like there was a very kind of, public tweet by John Carmack saying, hey, this feels like more of a kind of something that doesn't move the needle for kind of VR. It doesn't move it forward as much as other low hanging fruit. And maybe it's just more the hygiene factor of being able to walk around and see other people. But yeah, how are you thinking about that? And what are your views on mixed reality? And have you seen many founders kind of pitching you directly for, hey, we're doing this in mixed reality, or is that kind of an aside?
Yeah, I think to the last question, I have seen a lot of, mixed reality approaches, but a lot of that I think came from more the perspective of we want to build something for the Vision Pro more so than there's something uniquely unlocked through mixed reality here. And again, I think I'm kind of the foil to Amal. Like I kind of tend to look more in the consumer space and the enterprise space. And I think that's where there might be a bit of a divergent point. Like I think for consumer, I think it's difficult. Like particularly if you look at something like gaming, right? Let's just talk about the Quest 3 and then about the Vision Pro, because I think even though on the surface they might look like, well, they both do MR, so they're kind of competing devices. I actually don't think it's true, and I'll talk about that. For gaming, for example, like I've been pitched, I think a bunch of like MR based games now, where you're doing something like in your room, the game sets up in your room or so. And they've all been boring, to be honest. They're all like games where I'm like, I wouldn't want to play this. Like, and I feel like it's actually very self-limiting, because the cool thing about a lot of these VR games is you can literally create the environment, right? There's this fantasy imagination factor that kind of goes out the window with MR. I think it's a nice technical novelty. I don't know if it actually creates any fun experiences. And I think on the consumer side, that's ultimately what it comes down to. Like, is it going to be fun? Do people want to spend time doing this? Nobody cares if it's actually really, if you have the headset strapped to your face anyway. I don't think anybody cares if it's in your house or if it's in a virtual environment. And so my thesis is actually that like the thing that they did with Xbox, where they go more into what the Vision Pro kind of pitch, which is effectively like a monitor replacement, just kind of on your face. Like they did what they did with Microsoft, the Xbox. That I think, for example, is interesting. I suspect that most of the MR gaming will probably be like that, right? Will be like, it'll still be on some like projected 2D plane, but just in your environment replacing a monitor. I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, because I think what was nice about what the Vision Pro effectively pitched was, hey, we're just a replacement for your desktop. We're like a replacement for your laptop. And they really demonstrated that. And so I think elements of that will also be true on the entertainment side with the Quest. But I think what really deviates from the Vision Pro, for example, which is why I really don't think they're competing pieces of hardware, and I don't actually think that this is a big threat to Apple, is Apple's basically telling you, you can do everything you want to do on your computer or on your phone, you can do this thing, right? So be it FaceTime, be it write your notes, be it working key, whatever it is, right? Like everything you can do in your Vision Pro all of a sudden, like pure computer replacement. Facebook can't really compete with that, because they don't have like a vertical hardware stack that people are already operating in. And so their approach is fundamentally different. And so I think you saw that a lot of the interesting use cases they did present with the Quest 3 are entertainment based, right? They're effectively still console based stuff, right? It's like I'm watching the NBA and I'm playing my Xbox and whatever. But it's not, I'm a 40-year-old professional and I want to do my work for all intents and purposes in this headset. And so I don't think the Quest 3 is actually positioned to compete with Apple there. So I'm much more bullish on it for how Apple's trying to do it, because they already have that vertical integration piece. But I'm kind of more like, yeah, it's nice from the MR side for consumers in the Quest, but like, is it really going to move the needle on a bunch of things? I'm not sure. It will put more headsets in people's hands, which generally is a good thing. But I think beyond that, I'm a little bit dubious about the actual application value.
Yeah. And Amal, I saw you when John Carmack tweeted that, he was saying, right, if anyone disagrees, please put some cash down and let's have a bet. And Amal, I think you were willing to put $1,000 down and
I finalized the bet with him, because I'm definitely willing to take that bet. Now the reason I think that Arian and I have different perspectives on the value of MR is that I think there's kind of at least two major ways you can think about VR. One is about like escapism and entertainment, and the other is about functionally getting something done. For escapism and entertainment, like Jordan says, like no kid asks for MR, they're trying to escape their bedroom. Yeah, if you're playing like baseball in VR, you want to be like up at Fenway Park, like hitting that like World Series home run, right? You don't want to be in your bedroom. And I think the more there maybe MR isn't as applicable. But in the functional use cases, like I'm trying to get some exercise done, I'm trying to review some designs. So, you know, let's say, you know, we are designers at, you know, a car company reviewing designs for like a new dashboard. You know, it's so much easier. Like you saw that with the Quest 2 backporting some pass-through functionality. It's so much easier to set up your Guardian, to just deal with the particularities of using immersive headset in a physical space, not wanting to trip over something. That it's, if what you need to do isn't fully immersive, then that MR pass-through can be just a way of making it much, much more comfortable to get in and out. I just put on the headset. I'm not like suddenly on Mars or something. I'm just in the room I was in 2 seconds ago. Okay, now I see, okay, these are the new proposed designs for like the new fall collection of clothing, or for the new, for an architectural review. So I'm reviewing a building, like just like with reviewing a architectural model, the foam model. You don't need to landscape all the area around the foam model for someone to review it. You don't need to go and take the foam model to the place where the building is going to be to review it. You can just focus on one thing right in front of you and have everything else be just the way you expect it. So I think in enterprise and in functional use cases, that there's still a big benefit of MR and like color quality MR.
I agree with that. I think they're going to be like specific use cases, like when you said the consumer side, like fitness, for example. One I imagine is like one where I agree, or like, you know, you mentioned design, like something, you know, shapes XR, I think would probably do pretty good in MR. But like, I think if I'm looking at this as the broader ecosystem in terms of how much it actually propels the adoption of it forward, right? Because you get this just influx of new experiences that people want or can do. Yeah, it might be very good for enterprise. I agree with that. But I think we already established early, like the enterprise aspects, we're not going to move as many headsets as consumers. Right? And so is it better to have it than to not have it? Yes. And I even think in very like functional senses, like I'm always saying, when I'll give, if I put the headset on, right? Let's say I have MR all of a sudden. I think the 2D planes in Quest are terrible, for example, right? But like if you can all of a sudden actually design like a, you know, an entry flow to get into an app where, you know, there's also this augments thing, whatever they were talking about, right? These like spatial anchors. I can say, okay, I put my headset on, I have pure MR, I can see my living room, and I can just click the kind of anchored object like on my TV to go into my favorite game, right? That's a much more nicely, less friction way of actually navigating in a virtual space. So there are like advantages to doing this. I think that just you can make the experience better and just make it less frictious, basically. But is it going to move a lot? I'm not particularly convinced a non-Apple headset will do that. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, interesting. So getting down to some kind of business and looking at some numbers, we did get some new numbers from Meta, albeit very vague. They announced that there'd been $2 billion worth of revenue through the Quest store. Now it's very vague. It may be that they're at 2.8 and they wanted to lowball the number in case it slows down, or like who knows what that number actually is, whether it's 2.1 or 2.6. But I think at the last Connect, they said 1.5. So we know that probably there's been around kind of another 500 million added in the last year. Now, I would say that number is a pretty big number, given that you can, you know, the number of official apps on the Quest store is still in its like hundreds. Tipatat, maybe you have a handle on the exact number there, but it's, you know, it's still a low number versus tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands on other app stores. Yeah. However, that number, it does look like maybe that revenue isn't accelerating, or maybe it's actually kind of, you know, tailed off. And there are more apps coming, right? I mean, also Meta announced that there was going to be another 100 new and refreshed apps coming to the store. So is maybe the revenue pool is big, but the competition for those dollars is getting greater? Or yeah, how would you analyze that, Tip? I know you've done a lot of work kind of picking apart some of these numbers previously. How did you interpret the Quest ecosystem?
So about 2 billion is where we're tracking it as well. And that's a huge number. I mean, that's fantastic. Again, the fact that there's been no other commercially viable app store since the smartphone, like on a new platform, and that Meta has been able to do over 2 billion is phenomenal. And we're tracking over, I think at this point, over 190 titles have done over $1 million in revenue. And so the actual average revenue per title, I think there's about like somewhere between like 500 to 600 apps right now. It just depends on if you count the apps, the app lab or not. But, you know, again, that's a pretty like decent number. And knowing that a top title has done over 200 million just in the Quest ecosystem is pretty phenomenal. And I'm surprised, like usually they do a breakdown and they say, oh yeah, this many number, like these many titles did over 10 million, these many titles did over 40 million or something like that, right? Like the fact that they didn't break down those numbers is kind of interesting to me. At least usually they have like a subsequent developer talk with Chris Pruitt or something, and he'll give a little bit more color, like might not be in the keynote, but then he'll break it down. And I really enjoy those because that usually matches what we've been tracking as well. But really the overall idea though of saying, hey, they built a vibrant, healthy ecosystem. It has been kind of like slowing down this year, but that's obviously what happens when you're switching to a new like device, right? Sales, hardware numbers go down, sales, software numbers go down. Well, but then there's a new device that's coming for the holiday and that might boost things back up. But I think overall though, saying for the average developer that there's still a great opportunity to be made, especially if you're an indie developer. I think it was actually another developer at Connect mentioned like the average Steam game makes $7,000 or something sad. And it's just like knowing that, okay, well, sure, you know, Meta is more, you know, hawkishly watching what's being released, but they'll give you feedback. They'll tell you if it's going to work or not. And then of the titles that do get in the store, that you're definitely guaranteed to make more than $7,000. I think that's a good sign.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so another quick question from the panel. So Andre says, has anyone among the panel ordered Quest 3? And maybe we can segue that into the AR glasses by asking, is anyone thinking about buying the AR glasses? For what it's worth on my side, I'm not going to buy the Quest 3 because I already have a Quest Pro and a Quest 2, and I have 7 other headsets in the house. So my wife has just said, please, can you just stop buying headsets? So I'm probably going to wait for Quest 4 or something after the Quest Pro, but I think I am going to buy the Ray-Bans, and we can go into that in a minute. But
oh no,
Denise, Denise, I'll start with you. Yeah, do you have a headset? Are you thinking of buying the Quest 3?
I straightforward no for me in terms of Quest 3, no headset. However, and Arian, I'm sorry to admit, I am actually thinking about the Ray-Bans. I am very excited about them. Lots to say on them. I think they're very, you know, outdoor native. I wear sunglasses in general. I wear AirPods. It feels like 2 in 1 with potential. Nice. For more and better.
Let's go around the table, and then I'm going to come back to you, Denise, on that topic. So, Arian, I think you're a no on the Ray-Bans, but what about the Quest 3?
I want to get into that. So, Quest 3, actually, I just ordered it before we got on the call, so I have. And actually, Dave, unlike you, I mean, I have a Quest Pro sitting here, and I passionately hate it, so I cannot wait to move off of that and to move on to Quest 3. Also, because the Quest 2 is really starting to feel old with everything or the Quest 2, if I misspoke, definitely starting to feel a bit old. So I think it's time for an upgrade. I can't wear this thing for more than 20 minutes before my head starts to hurt. I can wear the Quest 2 for 2 hours and I'm fine. I don't know, the Quest Pro just doesn't work for me. The glasses, and so I will say this as a disclaimer. So obviously for those who are watching that don't know, I spent about 4.5 years in Meta RL, and the majority of that time was actually spent working on this thing. So I am very intricately familiar with the whole development process of it over the last 4 years. And I've also said this internally, so I have no real issue in complaining about it in public, that I think it's a hunk of junk that shouldn't ship. Even the last one was one that shouldn't ship because I built it, so I can say that. It's bad, right? And so this one, like I think there's some insights that they did from the beginning that I thought was very smart. Like I think, for example, doing the whole Ray-Bans thing, extremely clever, right? Because like Google Glass, clearly one of the issues there, no one wants to look like a doofus walking around with like the Google glasses, right? So if you make something that looks fairly approximate to fashion, which you obviously get with Ray-Ban's logo, very smart way to try to integrate this and put this to people. The problem is it doesn't actually do anything functional, right? And even this one, you know, they're like, it does this, which is effectively the same thing the current version does. The only difference is they promise you some software update that they're going to ship in here that might make it cool, right? Where like, you know, you can identify buildings, right? You can translate these signs and whatever. Now, here's I'm going to put my head on I'm going to really stake myself out here for this one because I worked on this. that place detection feature, you know, where they're like scanning Washington Square Park or something, and it tells you stuff about it. My specific team of 5 people was tasked to do this. They told us to deprioritize it when I left. I left at the end of May. The company explicitly gave us the top-down order to stop working on that feature. So I was shocked to see it in the keynote, because I'm like, they explicitly told us 4 months ago to stop doing this. Nobody cares about it, right? So I texted, first thing I did is I texted my team, and I was like, did anybody work on this since I left? They're like, nope, no, it's been staffed to absolutely nobody. So I don't actually think this thing's going to ship, knowing how things work there, right? Like it's probably not going to happen. Like what might happen is they ship some feature that lets you identify like 4 landmarks or something, right? That are kind of pre-populated, but it's not going to be like, oh, this is the Starbucks of Fifth Avenue. No way that ships on the update, right? And so I think you have to look at all those with a grain of salt. I don't think it's going to be as good as it is, but it goes back to the point that I'm largely cynical that it will do what it needs to do. The second point, I'll leave this short because I want to pass it on. I'm not convinced that audio is good UI for wearable devices. I think it's actually pretty terrible, and I think pretty like Silicon Valley bubble, where all you do is kind of sit in your car and never really engage with people closer. Like, who's sitting on the Manhattan subway and talking to their glasses, right? Like, it's probably not going to work. Or like the tube in London. Like, I don't think people are going to talk to their glasses on the tube, right? And so I'm going to, that's an island I will die on, that audio is a terrible interface. I think there are other alternatives. I'll just stop there and pass it to either Amal or Tipatat.
Cool. So I was going to ask Amal and Tip if you were going to buy, but I'm going to come straight back to Denise just to get to the other side. So as a consumer looking at this, what gets you excited to want to buy a pair? Like, I want to buy a pair.
Yeah, I mean, he's torn. Arian's just torn the functionalities to bits. So perhaps they can be dissuaded for this generation and then focus on the next one. But I personally love the principle of it. I would not buy a headset. You know, you're saying you won't buy one because you have 7. I don't have any, and don't intend to get one in the near term because of the use cases. But the use case of the glasses is, to me, much more native. I mean, it's native in terms of the behaviors. I personally think voice control is not appropriate all the time, but is important to have. I don't know why it's been, you know, so slow to roll out even for mobile and other devices. And so this idea of a hands-free outdoor experience, for me, is much more native, intuitive, and can be much more powerful. And the idea of replacing other devices into one, in this case the glasses, also makes sense. I also think it's very smart, without wanting to derail from the kind of Ray-Ban discussion specifically, this sort of interoperable kind of cross-platform strategy that Meta seems to be playing in at the moment, where you have kind of the same technology and continuity across different devices, to me also makes sense. Which means that you can just have in the long term better cross-platform interoperable experiences, even though I can see that it's obviously not relevant in the short term. So I think it's worth distinguishing, just like with the mixed reality debate earlier, worth distinguishing sort of the principle of a product and whether the tech is good enough. And I can totally buy that the tech is good enough, and there's a lot of promise that isn't really deliverable. But the idea of the glasses for me sounds amazing. I mean, I would definitely get them if, you know, if the reviews were good, from, you know, and the tech worked.
Nice. Awesome. So Tipatat, and then I'll come to you, Amal, just like quickly. Are you buying the Quest 3? I think I saw a picture of you with one on your head.
Yeah, that was from Connect. I mean, obviously I will. Work will expense it, so it's like not even a question for me. Like, and I would say, like, as an investor, like, you should get work to expense it. You should not be paying for it, and you should have all of them, right? Like, you should get it no matter what, right? Like,
unless you have a wife who doesn't want any more headsets.
What I'd say too is, like, get rid of the old headsets, right? But I will say that we haven't really talked about this, but the performance upgrade is significant. Like, switching to the next generation chipset is huge. And that's the one thing, like, Quest Pro, I think, was actually held back because it was using the old chipset. So I think, yeah, and it's not just about pretty graphics. It's about more realistic physics, better simulation, like just all these things that, you know, we know. The Quest 2 was a marvel, but still using, you know, older generation technology. And so this is the newest device that uses the the second generation Qualcomm chipset, and hopefully too that they can upgrade the performance over time with some software unlocks like they've been able to do for the Quest. But I think it is a big enough upgrade that it's definitely, I would recommend anyone that has a Quest 2 to definitely upgrade to the Quest 3, especially if you're like a developer or you're in the startup ecosystem and you need that overhead. Because again, it's like, you know, the cost of getting engineers to optimize your build or whatever. It's just like, no. Like, just throw money at the hardware, and that's worth way more.
Yeah. And the Ray-Ban Metas?
Oh, yeah, I was actually a huge fan of the Ray-Ban, the original ones. Like, I could totally see they're super limited. They were clunky, not mainstream, but I kind of liked them for like these just little things. Like, and I do appreciate that, they're continuing it, even though it wasn't very successful. I do wonder, will generative AI, chat be the killer app for smart glasses? Like, that's something that, definitely video wasn't. Audio wasn't, like, audio playback wasn't, notifications hasn't been like what Glass was doing, like little postage size. So it'll be interesting to see if they can prove that this generative AI. And I was excited about the idea that the camera could actually understand the world, and they would use like segment anything and all these other technologies, and maybe kind of get something that worked better than using your phone has in the past. But after hearing Aaron, what you said, I'm like super skeptical, and you were very convincing.
It's a hard problem. I mean, I will say that it's really harder than it looks, right? And so part of the reason why it doesn't ship is because it's like nobody's really figured out the killer way to do this. There's this whole rabbit hole I go down. I don't think Meta is actually positioned to do this, but that's an entirely different conversation I want to get into. But yeah, it's a tough. I agree with Denise's point about the concept of it is nice, but unfortunately, a lot of it also depends on the implementation of it. The one thing I'll say about all of this, and I think something else that came out, how Meta thinks about these things internally. Like, they shipped the last one, the Ray-Ban Stories, with a lot of pushback internally, actually, because they're like, this thing isn't ready. But Meta's philosophy is to ship a lot and ship quickly, right? And so they actually explicitly put this thing on the market with, and I think it sort of manifests itself that way, obviously, with how they treated it. Like, not as a, hey, we want to push this to the masses and try to get as many people to buy it, but like, hey, we sell a couple 100,000 of these. It's more of the data that we get back from users that lets us iterate on the product and like just putting it out in the real world. And, I think there are two sides to the coin of whether that approach has merit or not. But that's largely their philosophy. And my guess is, and again, I'm not internal anymore, so I don't know if that's what the thinking is, but I wouldn't be surprised part of the thinking with this glasses, this generation, is the same thing where, hey, it's a slight iteration. Let's see if we can get some like information delta now and continue to iterate on this. Because all of this is bubbling up to the AR glasses that they want to do. That's the ultimate trajectory that this is on. And these are just the early kind of generations of it that are kind of pre-AR, right? But that's really what they're trying to do. And so especially, I think, with that timeline of AR being further and further out practically now, I think they're just trying to find more and more ways. It's like, how can we try to generate value with this kind of a wearable maybe sooner? But so I would take it kind of as that. It's like, I'm not completely convinced that Meta is putting this out with the idea of we want hundreds of millions of people to buy this thing.
Got it. So Amal, just quickly to wrap up, and then I'm going to move on to a question. Are you buying the Quest 3 and are you buying the Ray-Bans?
I mean, as Tipatat said, like, as an investor, I've already ordered the Quest 3 and I need to have it, because part of what I'm doing when I'm talking to a founder, especially in VR, where there's not a lot of previous patterns of success, like most of the founders are first-time VR founders, right? Is that you have to see, can they take full advantage of the technology, right? And can they create an experience that is, gonna wow and impress? And so, our belief is that the Quest 2 long-term will be a very small portion of the VR headsets on the market. So you have to be targeting the Quest 3, and you have to be taking advantage of every, cycle of processing power that it has available. So for sure. Would I buy one if I was not an investor in VR? That's an interesting question, but that's too hard for me to imagine. It's like imagining, what if a square head was a circle or something. On the Ray-Bans, I'm not much into social media or anything, but I'm a dad of 3, and if there's a way for this to help me like capture interesting memories of my kids, that would be pretty interesting to me, just as a camera that's kind of always, like, really always with you instead of having to whip out the phone. I think for me, it matters whether they can. I have a very strong prescription, so can they support prescription lenses? I saw an interesting comment in the chat. Well, I'll let you direct, Dave, but maybe on this matter, why related to my excitement about the Quest 3. Tom Malone says, you know, how do you explain to non-XR experienced buyers why the immersive experience has value? You cannot. You cannot explain to anyone what VR is or why it's interesting. You have to show it to them. You have to travel physically to their location, which is kind of an obsolete idea, but it's still very much essential in enterprise VR. You know, if you talk to like founders of our companies like Anurupa Ganguly, Prisms XR, Christoph at Arthur, they pack the headsets into a car, into a suitcase. They fly out there, they drive out there, and they have it all configured for their target user, and they put the thing onto their face, like with their hands. So that's what it takes. So,
I mean, the other thing I'd add to that, though, in terms of like breaking into the mainstream, it's just like you have to show that the value is really transformative. It has to be not just 10x. You have to do the impossible. Like the things that get us excited, you know, like, you know, and with Anorak, we're an investor in this company too, Vivid Vision, right? They can treat the untreatable with eye exercise to actually strengthen the eye and cure diplopia for adult males, which was something that wasn't possible before, unless it was invasive surgery. And so understanding those use cases where it's not about, hey, can you save 10% or can you be a little bit more efficient? No. It's how do you really showcase something that's breakthrough and unimaginable?
Yeah, that's the operative thing. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Aaron. For me, that's something where Apple just have this kind of structural advantage, right? I think there's going to be a lot of people who work in businesses or are CEOs of companies. They're going to walk into the Apple shop. They're going to try their headset and they're going to go back to their family and be like, wow, try this. And then they're going to go into the office next day and say, hey, like we should start doing meetings in this. And I just don't think that would have been the same. Like you wouldn't have worn a Vario headset and seen the power of that. You wouldn't have, you know, tried the Quest, or you would have seen you would have gone into some virtual roller coaster or something at a party. And I think that's the Apple, the structural Apple effect. I think the other thing that's interesting for me, my biggest concern with the Ray-Bans is if it was Apple glasses, I'd almost be more excited because I knew it would just work with all the apps on my phone. And whereas with this, like Meta, I have to go and like have to have the app, and you know, I don't really like the Quest app, so I'm wondering how the Ray-Ban app is going to be. But for me, the use case is actually fairly boring. It's, you know, if I'm actually, I go out and I do a lot of outdoor sports, so like kayaking or cycling, and I just, you know, to be able to capture those moments without having to kind of grab a phone. And so there's reasons. And then also, just as an investor, it just kind of piques my curiosity just to see, would I wear it? And it's a bit of a trial. So I can imagine I will buy it and then it will kind of, you know, maybe not be with me. There's a kind of a social thing. I'm not sure I would wear it to a dinner party or like anywhere near my friends, because they're gonna give me stick, or I'm gonna feel a little bit socially awkward. But yeah, I want to move on then. So from that topic, we had one last question, and I want to spend the last 15 minutes or last 10 minutes at least talking about the AI piece, because I think that was really important. But somebody, before we move on from XR, I'll find the thing in a minute. Somebody was asking, where do we think the most interesting area to invest is in 2024? So kind of onwards and into 2024. And let's do this as a lightning round. So maybe kind of 1 or 2 sentences, no more. Arian, I'll start with you. Anything you're particularly excited about in there?
Social VR. I think that's the very clear market right now. I mean, look at the power users in VR. They are primarily Gen Alphas. They're teenagers, right? They're sitting at home, at least on the consumer side. A few companies that we're in, you know, that is targeting that group and really kind of building that Robloxy kind of experience for teenagers, are growing extremely fast and retaining extremely well. And I think that trend's only going to accelerate, right? You know, I think you talk to any parents, at least the ones that I do that have teenage kids, they're like, my kids are playing Roblox. They're not on Facebook. They're not on Instagram, anything like that, right? Yeah. And VR is just the perfect extension of that. So I think that's just the opportunity everybody's knows right now.
Sounds good. Social VR, Tipatat?
I mean, honestly, I still think everything's up for grabs. You know, I think gaming, especially in social, but I think, you know, I think still interesting for me is consumer apps that are not gaming, I think are going to be very interesting. So social could fall kind of into that. But I think, you know, like I still think the killer app for VR for me for the Quest right now would be a Roblox level editor in VR. If you could make the experience of building Roblox levels feel less like CAD and more like playing with Legos, I think you could easily convert, a quarter of the, 20 million wannabe Roblox developers that are out there into something. And that would be a huge opportunity. But just think about those kinds of things where you're like, okay, where have we seen VR kind of work, and how can we find mainstream audience and appetite for that? I think that now is that opportunity.
Definitely. And I think Rec Room have kind of proved that out, right? I mean, the Rec Room was VR native, but across all other platforms. But the unique thing about Rec Room is I can go into a space with a buddy and we can like physically be creating levels and stuff like that. Amal?
I agree with Tipatat. Like, everything's up for grabs. There's no market that is like won yet in VR permanently, There's no Apple or Microsoft of VR yet. And I agree on the consumer social aspects. Like, what if instead of just working out on a Peloton, you were like working out with your buddies? What if instead of just watching a TV show, you can do this in big screen right now, but like, these could get more sophisticated. You could just hang out with other people. So we have some investments in this space as well, but also just remote work. I mean, remote work, people are saying, return to the office, don't return to the office, hybrid, none of it's working. Nobody's happy. And nobody's happy because spending time on Zoom for like 6 hours a day just is unworkable. And so, of course, we're in Arthur, which is a meeting space in VR, but I think there's going to be a lot of business applications in XR that are going to be more pleasant to work with, and also just much more powerful. Like, what if you did your data analytics? What if reviewing your analytics was something you did in VR, and traversed your data as a three-dimensional object rather than a two-dimensional screen? What if I saw someone in the comments talking about cybersecurity? What if you visualize your network topology and attacks in XR? I mean, I just think there's just thousands of opportunities. So it's going to be a really interesting year.
Yeah, Denise.
Yeah, I mean, I obviously agree with all of this. So social tools, business tools. If I was to add another, it would be creator tools. So opportunity and creator economy tools. So opportunity for people to build more easily, distribute, but also, I guess the wider concept of creator economy within this universe just means more types of business models and monetization opportunities, which has been a bottleneck for investment, at least from our perspective, with some other, some other investors.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I think for us, we've definitely been looking and doing things that are kind of non-gaming. We've done a couple of VR gaming things. I think now is a good time for that. But outside of that, anything that's consumer XR, which is outside of gaming. So we've just done something in kind of wellness and meditation. We're looking at education, but like also like education that has a consumer go-to-market. I think things like language learning and stuff like that. I think that there's some really interesting opportunities there that just lend themselves to VR, like Prisms, love what they're doing, although that is also a kind of more B2B go-to-market. And then also, I mean, no one really quite knows how the Apple ecosystem is going to take off, but things that can already work today, like we'll get distribution outside of the Vision Pro, but will really shine when Vision Pro comes into the market. And I think a big category for that is productivity. So like bottoms up, like work stuff. So not like big, heavy enterprise training, but just something where that guy who's gone into the Apple store takes it home and thinks about how he can use it. He or she can use it for their, kind of improve their productivity. I think that's going to be an interesting category. Like engineering teams, like doing, kind of engineering reviews, looking at stats, like debugging code, like all of those types of use cases are just so much better when you have multiple screens and you can be more collaborative. But
I'm going to push back and say I don't believe in those use cases. I really don't believe in like traditional IT use cases for like multiple screens and all that kind of stuff, because screens are very cheap. And I think actually for the Apple Vision Pro, though, I will say the one thing I am looking for is someone does a spatial video editor, like a spatial way of editing video, like current 2D videos to consume. I think that could be an interesting one for the Apple Vision Pro. But I don't know so much about like, just doing spreadsheets.
I'll double push back on Tipatat now. I'll say this as an ex-engineer. One of the things that always killed me, one of the reasons I actually hated to leave home and even though I could work from anywhere in the world, I always set up my desk here, was because when I was coding, I had a 3-monitor setup all the time. And I freaking hated to go on vacation and have to code on my laptop. absolutely hated it, right? I think most developers you talk to have the same thing, right? They're going to be like, I want my setup, right? I want my screens. And literally the Vision Pro solves that, right? Because it's like I can immediately just take my actual setup anywhere pretty seamlessly. So like my thesis, actually, I've gone so far to say, people when they ask me, I always say, I think the initial adoption user base of the Vision Pro, considering they're going to ship like 500,000 or whatever they're saying now it's going to be, are primarily going to be like Silicon Valley programmers. Has actually been my thesis of what the main customer base of that kind of small majority of 500,000 is going to be. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just kind of how I see it panning out.
All right, I'm gonna. Oh, go on, Denise, and then let's move to AI after this comment.
Just a brief comment to agree with Arian that it isn't just about cost; it's also what's easier to use, and it's not just transportation. It's literally how you use it and the user experience of it. And so, even if it was more expensive, if ultimately someone works better through a different interface, they might just ultimately prefer that.
It's gamers too, not just developers. Actually, I think it's the same thing, right? Like, so there's definitely some merit for that application, I think.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, good stuff. So, so Meta AI, I think this was something, it's interesting because Meta Connect has traditionally been about the kind of the VR and AR stuff. So it's really interesting to see them bringing AI in and not just in isolation. We've also seen it kind of in tandem with the whole product. So like you said, Denise, it's like, we're seeing how all of these different things are starting to converge. And I think a lot of people have talked about that, but it's we're starting to see tangible evidence. So I don't know where we want to start, but I mean, for me, the two interesting things were the introduction of Emu. I mean, the use case of stickers, I'm not the sort of person who just kind of like, oh, wow, I need something to produce stickers, but it's, just the foundational stuff of that is super interesting that Meta is in that game now. Maybe has some consequences for some startups like in that space as well. And then the AI personas, again, I'm not sure I'm the kind of the target user for that, but it takes us in a super interesting direction. So yeah, Denise, maybe you can kick us off. I know you've kind of recently done a few kind of investments in the AI space and have been looking at that. So yeah, pick any of those topics, but just kind of maybe give us an analysis of what you found interesting and what opportunities there are for startups.
Yeah. I mean, I find what Meta's doing at the moment really fascinating. This is obviously a little closer to home for us from an investment perspective. I mean, we can pick each of these and kind of do a deep dive on each of the examples you mentioned. But really, for me, the reason it's super exciting and intriguing is the fact that they're doing all of these and they're almost trying to kind of better the market in a disrupting way that people thought OpenAI was going to be disruptive earlier in the year, like a platform approach. So they're doing multimodal kind of, open source-ish, Llama 2, Llama 3 on the way. They're doing vision. They're cross-platform, as I said, like they're thinking of deployment across not just Quest, but WhatsApp, Instagram, there are other platforms. The assistants, cross-functional, so cross-thematic in terms of sports, fashion, art, but also for the purposes of companionship, education, entertainment. So not a single use case, but actually broadening out how these assistants or personalities can be relevant to people. And so we're finding this kind of general purpose tool that's also going to help you do your bookings and reservations and social planning and sort of have this broader applicability, which is what made people pause with OpenAI when they were introducing these plugins, right? And so you're seeing potential disruption of how advertising is going to work, overlap with business tools, an entirely different opportunity for first-party data strategy and insights in terms of their secondary markets around data products for brands and other potential players, and really building this kind of interconnected universe of these devices and services, right? And potentially, if anything, I'd say the use of the word metaverse is probably not as, is happening as frequently as perhaps in previous years, but ultimately in this kind of abstract sense of the metaverse, I'd say this Meta AI vision is bringing Meta closer to kind of that, that ecosystem. And that's what I find, extremely exciting, intriguing, threatening for some of the other established players, all of the above, that kind of high-level strategy for how all of these things are tying together. And then, of course, I'll pause, but obviously for each of those individual components, there's lots to say, like on the, on Emu, on the personalities and so on.
Got it. I think one interesting thing for me that I'd love to get some of your opinions on. So we'd been talking to a couple of companies that actually were doing very similar things to Meta, and we'd literally spoken to them that week. Then Meta announced like, "Hey, we're building this AI personas." And you're like, "Oh, hang on, that's a competitive threat." And that previous company probably weren't going to build their own app. They were going to leverage that and kind of deliver those personas onto WhatsApp, but also TikTok and others. So, and I kind of challenged one of the founders and said, "Hey, like, are you going to pivot like post Meta Connect?" And she actually said a really interesting thing, which was, if you look at Meta's track record, I mean, they don't have a great track record of building innovative new products. Like when a new category breaks out, they acquire. I mean, we've seen it like Instagram, Oculus, I mean, who we've been talking about all day, WhatsApp, Masquerade, if anyone remembers that, Control Labs, Giphy, Customer, like all of these companies they ultimately acquired. But I think as an investor, seeing what Meta is doing, and this applies for the other big tech platforms, I think it really gives pause for thought of like, well, do I want to kind of invest in a company that now is up against, is potentially going to cannibalize the startups that could be building on top of their open source models. So yeah, that's a fairly general concern, but I'd love some opinions from anyone who wants to jump in there. Arian?
Yeah, Dave, I think to that, I've thought about that. Like one of my good friends has actually started a company that is doing this kind of digital cloning thing, because I think this whole persona as an AI studio feature is basically determined that, okay, digital clones are, at least Meta is going to try to make it a thing, right? It's no longer kind of this like startup idea, but they kind of validated that concept can exist. I think there are two issues. I think a lot of missed opportunities for Meta here. To be honest, one is Meta is obviously focused on these kind of consumer applications. You're going to chat with it, whatever, and then even you can start making digital clones of yourself. I'm assuming based on stuff that you write on the Facebook family of apps. I'm generally more interested actually these digital clone things in the enterprise sense, right? In terms of like using this for business acceleration and all of that. And so I'm not sure if Meta intrinsically is actually designed to build things that would really build this digital clone of actually all the mediums that you want that's outside of the Facebook ecosystem, given Facebook is social media, it's not a work platform, right? It's not professional. So I think there's still going to be gaps there where there can be kind of more business facing, less consumer facing applications of this. I do think the missed opportunity though was, and I think this is something I rage about probably all the time now in the AI space, is this obsession with the chatbot UI. Like chatbot UI is pretty terrible, I think. That's another thing that's not going to last, right? I think people are into it because to some extent it's a showcase of new technology, and the most innovative thing obviously OpenAI did with that was say, hey, we're going to actually make our research open to the general public by just putting the chatbot. I don't see a future where everything is just a chatbot, right? And I think the one thing that Meta had the opportunity to do is take some of the personas, right? Like Tom Brady, I think was one of them. I think it would have been pretty cool to sort of draw a thread between, and this goes back to this metaverse concept, right? That I think they don't articulate particularly well, to say, where's maybe interacting with a Tom Brady actually more useful, right? It's not me chatting to him, but it's Tom Brady yelling at me in Fit XR if I'm being lazy, for example. Like I think that could be a more interesting application of something like this, right? Or I'm a Golf Plus and I play around with Tiger Woods, for example, right? Like would be much more compelling experience than me just talking to like a Tiger Woods, for example. And I think that would have been like an interesting way. Like I think it's a feature, not a product in the end of the day, but like an interesting way to really draw a thread through everything that they're doing, because I think inevitably that's where it's going to end up anyway, right? Like these digital clones are going to exist in some sort of XR capacity. It's just where it's going to go, right? They didn't do that. They kind of left it to something that feels more gimmicky, because like frankly, like a chatbot of talking to some clone of Snoop Dogg is more of a gimmick than it is a product in the end of the day, in my opinion at least. I think there was just a missed opportunity there to really articulate a broader vision of what this is actually all the building blocks for, which is why I say like I like it, I don't love it, because you can start to see where this goes and how it's interesting, but the current rendition is kind of very underwhelming. So it's I don't know, it's like I'm 50-50 on it.
Amal, looks like maybe you can have the last word before we wrap up, because we're just coming up onto time.
I don't think I had a last word response. Let's see. I'll just give the response that I was going to give, which is that I think, Arian, what they didn't talk about was that the applications of all this tech, I'm assuming, are mostly around advertising. I assume that like most of their image generation capabilities are eventually going to be used for advertising. Most of their persona stuff will eventually be used for advertising. So I don't think they're necessarily trying to productize this. Maybe they're just trying to say, okay, hey, you know, maybe this same picture, this same like advertising image of a person wearing a shirt, we're gonna like layer a sweater over the shirt for advertising to people who are in colder climates during the winter, and like all that stuff will probably make like $1 gajillion for them. And so I don't think it needs to have any like real like consumer facing application outside of that to be like more than profitable.
The other flip side, you could say it's a proof of concept for the AI studio thing, which I actually think is an underlying thing is more interesting, right? Because that is actually supposed to be a consumer product, right? That's just okay. If we pre-populate it with something, it gives people an idea and imagination of what they can do with it. That's the other argument. But you know, where does that sort of start to lead? And I think that's kind of a different discussion. But it could be, you know, you might be right.
All right, good stuff. Well, I feel like we probably should have left another 10, 15 minutes to dive into some of this topic. Yeah, thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us. And thanks to everyone for leaving some great comments and questions. Hopefully at some point we can all like spend 2 hours in a warehouse in wherever Lex Friedman and Mark Zuckerberg got themselves cloned, because I would love to do this as our Kodak avatars. But until next time, thanks for joining us. I'm sure most of the panelists, I'll speak for them, but if you want to reach out to them with your kind of what you're working on, everybody should be linked in the LinkedIn. And if not, we can leave our Twitter addresses and our LinkedIn handles in the chat there. But yeah, thanks to everybody for joining. And yeah, really looking forward to the next one already.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.